Have you ever found yourself, I don't know, completely unable to speak your mind?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you stumbled over your words just to keep the peace, or swallowed an opinion because it felt like way too dangerous to share.
Right.
Or maybe you've just felt like a silent intruder in your own life. Because, well, we've all been conditioned to view that kind of silence as a failure.
Yeah, exactly. As a weakness.
Right, like a lack of courage or some character flaw. But what if we have it completely backwards?
We usually do.
Yeah, so what if the silence you've always judged as your greatest weakness is actually an ancient, like highly sophisticated neurological defense mechanism that's literally designed to keep you alive?
It is a profound paradigm shift when you realize that silence isn't just an absence of action.
Right.
In the context of emotional survival, silence is a deeply active, biologically expensive choice that your nervous system makes for you.
That reframing is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. So we are taking a massive stack of clinical research, psychological frameworks, and somatic practices to uncover the neurobiology and psychology of silence.
And specifically, the silence that's born from emotional manipulation, covert narcissism, and complex trauma.
Exactly. We are going to map out the unconscious mechanisms that govern human connection and, hopefully provide a roadmap for how to reclaim your authentic voice.
Yes.
And just a quick note before we jump into all this.
Yeah.
We are exploring clinical frameworks and research provided in our sources today just to understand human behavior.
Right. We aren't here to diagnose you or anyone else.
No, not at all. We're simply impartial guides walking you through the science of these experiences.
And the science is really where we have to start.
Okay, let's do it.
Because trauma is not merely a historical event, right? It's not just a bad memory you can push past.
Right.
It is an active, ongoing psychobiological process. So if we want to understand how to get the voice back, we first have to understand the biological machinery that takes it away in the first place.
Okay, so let's ground this right in the body then. Most of us are familiar with the standard physiological response to danger, which is fight or flight.
Right, exactly.
The adrenaline surge, you either battle the threat or you run from it. That makes intuitive sense to me. But our sources talk about environments where neither of those options actually works.
Yeah, so imagine being a child in a home with an emotionally volatile, unpredictable caregiver.
Okay.
Or an adult trapped in a dynamic with a covert narcissist. You cannot fight back because asserting yourself results in overwhelming psychological punishment or even physical danger.
Right, that just makes it worse.
Exactly. And you cannot flee because you are physically, financially, or emotionally dependent on this person.
Wow, yeah.
So the active defense mechanisms, fight and flight, they are completely thwarted.
So what does the body do when those primary defense systems are blocked? Like, it can't just give up.
No, it doesn't give up. The autonomic nervous system shifts gears into a far older evolutionary pathway.
Older.
Yeah, it transitions into what clinical literature calls a dorsal vagal parasympathetic state.
Okay, dorsal vagal parasympathetic state. That's a mouthful.
It is. But behaviorally, we recognize this as freezing or fawning.
Let me stop you right there, because the concept of fawning just totally blew my mind when I was reading through the research.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I always thought of fawning as just, people-pleasing, like being a pushover, having no spine. But you're saying this is a biological reflex, like flinching when something flies at your face.
It is entirely reflexive. I mean, freezing is the profound physical and emotional shutdown, just becoming immobilized and invisible.
Right.
Fawning is basically the proactive version of that.
Interesting.
Yeah. It manifests as extreme compliance, hypervigilant appeasement, and anticipating the abuser's needs just to avoid conflict.
So you're managing their emotions for them.
Exactly. The hidden emotional need here is profound safety. If your brain calculates that expressing an authentic need historically leads to pain, rejection, mockery, or abandonment, well, the nervous system actively paralyzes your vocal expression. It just decides that staying quiet or saying exactly what the abuser wants to hear is the ultimate life preservation strategy.
The brain literally says, do not vibrate those vocal cords or we will die.
Yes.
That's fascinating. But it also sounds, incredibly taxing. If you're constantly suppressing your natural impulses to appease a threat, what is that doing to your brain's actual processing power?
The cost is just monumental. When you're trapped in a chronic trauma response, the body is forced into a persistent state of hyperarousal.
So you're always on edge.
Always. You are constantly scanning the environment for microexpressions of anger, shifts in tone, slamming doors. Your brain is tasked with processing rapid and overwhelming emotional surges of terror, shame, and hypervigilance.
And there's a limit to how much data the brain can process at once, right?
Yeah.
I think the research calls this the bottleneck effect.
Yeah, the bottleneck effect. Think of it like a massive highway system trying to funnel into a single toll booth.
Okay.
The emotional surges, the sensory data of the threat, the autonomic arousal, those are thousands of cars speeding down the highway.
Right, all at once.
But the cognitive systems, the parts of your brain responsible for language, logical sequencing, and decision-making, those are the toll booths.
Oh, man.
And they simply cannot process the sheer volume of emotional traffic.
So the toll booth gets completely overwhelmed and traffic just backs up for miles.
Exactly. And that traffic jam is what we experience as emotional congestion.
Emotional congestion, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, it manifests in a few specific ways. Most commonly, it results in prolonged, crushing periods of silence. The victim physically cannot find the words to explain what they're feeling because the language centers of the brain are essentially offline.
Because all the power is going to survival.
Right. Alternatively, the pressure builds until it results in a sudden, aggressive outburst.
Snapping at someone.
Yeah, a release of pressure that usually fails entirely to convey the actual inner need.
Because the outburst isn't communication, it's just an explosion of backed up traffic.
Exactly.
I mean, this has to consume immense cognitive resources. It explains why people in these dynamics feel so mentally drained, or why they struggle to focus at work, or why they just seem, disconnected. Maintaining the silence takes literally all of their energy.
It is an act of suppression. And here's a crucial law of human neurobiology, right? Emotion functions as a unified physiological experience.
What do you mean by unified?
I mean, you cannot selectively numb pain without numbing joy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If your nervous system is working overtime to disconnect from the terror of the abuse, you are simultaneously suppressing your capacity for connection, pleasure, and spontaneity. Survivors often describe feeling like they're watching their own life through a foggy window.
A foggy window. That's a devastating image. But it can get much more extreme than a foggy window, though. I want to bring up something from the clinical literature that genuinely shocked me. Yes, functional neurological system disorder, or FNSD. It used to be called conversion disorder, right?
Yeah.
This is where the biological shutdown goes from, subtle to absolute.
Yeah, FNSD is the extreme end of the somatic spectrum. This is a condition where profound emotional distress is unconsciously converted into very real, measurable neurological symptoms, despite the absence of any organic disease.
So physical symptoms without a physical illness.
Yes. And in the context of trauma-induced silence, this often presents as psychogenic aphonia.
Psychogenic aphonia.
Right. This is the sudden, very real physical loss of the ability to speak following a traumatic event.
That is just, a doctor can look down the patient's throat and see that everything's normal, right?
Exactly. The laryngeal pathology is completely normal. The vocal cords are perfectly healthy. There's no infection, no tumor, no structural damage whatsoever.
Wow.
Yet the person cannot make a sound above a whisper, or sometimes they can't make no sound at all.
I am really struggling to wrap my head around that. If the hardware is perfectly fine, how can the sound just vanish? Is the person making a conscious choice not to speak?
No. And that is a vital distinction to make. They are not faking it, and they are not choosing it.
Okay.
The psychological stress is so profound that the unconscious mind commands the body's speech centers to completely shut down.
It's exactly like a home's electrical circuit breaker.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. A massive surge of dangerous electricity, like a traumatic event, hits the system. And to prevent the entire house from catching fire and burning to the ground, the breaker just trips. Click.
Yes.
It shuts off the power to the voice entirely just to save the organism.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it, yeah. The voice is sacrificed to preserve the life of the individual, so it's actually a biological success story in the short term.
But the tragedy is when that circuit breaker gets stuck in the off position for years, long after the initial threat has passed. Okay, so we understand the internal biology now, the body's desperate attempt to survive. But I want to pivot to the external environment. How do these toxic environments actively groom the nervous system to trip that circuit breaker in the first place? How is this silence manufactured?
Well, we have to examine the systemic relational dynamics that mandate this silence. In the literature, this environment of systemic suppression is often beautifully and, well, terribly described as the silence of the forest.
The silence of the forest. It sounds like a fairy tale, but a really grim one. What does that actually look like in a home or a relationship?
It describes an ecosystem where a survivor's fundamental truth is systematically shaped, pruned, and ultimately silenced because their reality is inconvenient to the abuser.
Right.
It thrives in relationships characterized by covert narcissism, emotional manipulation, and coercive control.
Covert being the operative word there, I think. Because this kind of abuse doesn't always look like a screaming match.
No, not at all.
It hides behind closed doors. Like, from the outside, the relationship might look incredibly polished. A successful career, a lovely family, a beautiful home. But inside the forest, the reality is entirely different.
Yes. The architecture of this environment is built on microaggressions.
Yeah.
It is the steady drip of chronic criticism, gaslighting, mocking, and blame shifting. Over hundreds and thousands of these microinteractions, the victim's brain learns a devastating mathematical equation.
Which is what?
Expressing a need equals conflict, having a boundary equals abandonment. So the safest, most logical option becomes chronic self-editing.
Let me push back on something here, because this is the part of the research that I found deeply perplexing.
Okay, what is it?
The concept of the compassion trap. The idea that victims will often defend and rationalize the actions of the abuser before they defend themselves.
Right, yes.
From a purely evolutionary standpoint, putting a predator's needs above your own safety seems like a terrible strategy. Why would the human brain ever wire itself to prioritize the person causing the pain?
It seems totally counterintuitive until you understand the primacy of human attachment.
Meaning what, exactly?
We are profoundly social creatures. For an infant, attachment to a caregiver is quite literally a matter of life and death. Without attachment, we die.
Oh, right. We can't survive on our own.
Exactly. So when an individual is trapped in an abusive dynamic, the terror of abandonment often overrides the drive for authentic self-expression.
So they prioritize the relationship over their own reality.
Yes, the compassion trap is an unconscious psychological tendency to confuse explanations with excuses.
Ah.
Survivors lean on cultural narratives like, hurt people hurt people. They focus intensely on the abuser's trauma, their difficult childhood, or even just their stress at work in order to rationalize the abuse.
The internal monologue is something like, they didn't mean to scream at me and belittle my career. They're just really stressed about their own job right now. I should be more understanding.
Yes, exactly. And the hidden emotional need driving that rationalization is the desperate desire to maintain the illusion of attachment and peace.
To keep the peace at all costs.
Right, because if the abuser is just misunderstood, well, then the relationship is still salvageable. The victim doesn't have to face the terrifying prospect of leaving or being alone. They choose self-abandonment to maintain the physical proximity of the abuser.
But the long-term cost of that self-abandonment is terrifying. It's not just a loss of voice, it's an erosion of your entire identity. The sources describe survivors who reach a point where they have difficulty making the most basic decisions. Like, they apologize for simply taking up space. They constantly second-guess their own memories.
Because when your reality is systematically denied, when you are repeatedly told, you're too sensitive or you're remembering it wrong or I never said that, your internal certainty is completely dismantled.
Yeah.
Gaslighting fundamentally distorts your epistemic trust.
Epistemic trust.
Yes, which is your ability to trust your own mind's interpretation of the world.
Man, if gaslighting is someone slowly turning down the lights until you think you're going blind, how does a person ever learn to trust their own eyes again when the abuser is the one holding the flashlight?
You don't. You start relying on the abuser to tell you what is real.
That is so dark.
You adopt the abuser's reality because your own feels way too unstable. And that is the core trauma of emotional abuse. It attacks the very foundation of human trust.
Wow.
Which brings us to the devastating aftermath. And when your trust in your own perception is shattered so profoundly, how do you navigate intimacy with anyone else?
This is a critical pivot right here.
Yeah.
Because the silence and the distortion don't magically disappear the moment you leave the toxic relationship, right? Or when you move out of the abusive home.
Unfortunately, no.
The psychological wiring has been fundamentally altered. So how does this relational trauma dictate the way survivors connect with new people long after the abuse has ended?
Well, it creates highly rigid, behavioral continuums. Survivors don't navigate new relationships based on the present reality of the new partner. They navigate based on the blueprint of past wounds.
Okay.
And in the clinical frameworks we're examining, this manifests in three distinct trust patterns.
Right, the three patterns. The first one is termed Velcro trust. I think the imagery there is painfully clear, but what is the actual psychological mechanism happening under the surface?
Velcro trust is characterized by extreme holding on and premature attachment.
Okay.
The driving unconscious mechanism is intense, overwhelming abandonment anxiety. For someone operating with Velcro trust, any space in a relationship feels like an impending rejection.
So how does that look in a new relationship, like on a first date?
It looks like over-disclosing deeply personal information very early on to force intimacy.
Trauma dumping.
Exactly. It manifests as a constant, insatiable need for reassurance. And most critically, victims in this pattern find it nearly impossible to express boundaries. The terror of the other person pulling away is so acute that they will mold themselves into whatever they believe the partner wants.
They just cling.
They cling, just like Velcro.
They are essentially broadcasting, I will abandon myself completely if you just promise not to abandon me.
Precisely. Now, if we swing the pendulum to the absolute opposite extreme of the continuum, we find cactus trust.
Cactus trust. Spiky, guarded, requiring zero water to survive.
A perfect description. Cactus trust is defined by rigid self-reliance and defensive distance.
So pushing people away.
Yes. The core behavioral mechanism here is preemptive rejection, keeping others at an extreme distance to protect the self against vulnerability.
So these are the people who might seem incredibly composed, like hyper-independent, professionally competent, but they are totally emotionally unreachable.
Yes, exactly. They mask their internal terror behind a prickly exterior. They minimize self-disclosure, they might abruptly end relationships when things get too close, and they enforce strict, almost punishing boundaries.
It's fascinating because Velcro and cactus look like complete behavioral opposites. I mean, one is desperately clinging and the other is aggressively pushing away. But if you look at the hidden emotional need, they're two sides of the exact same coin.
They are both desperate attempts to control the unbearable pain of vulnerability and the threat of abandonment. The Velcro strategy tries to control the threat by merging with it. The cactus strategy tries to control the threat by banishing it.
I think anyone listening right now is probably evaluating their own history, wondering, am I sticking to people or am I keeping them at arm's length?
Yeah.
But what is the alternative? If those are the trauma responses, what is the third pattern? Like, what is the goal of recovery?
The goal is what the clinical models call kindred trust.
Kindred trust.
Kindred trust is an authentic, progressive connection. It's not immediate and it is not guarded. It's the ability to build genuine, balanced relationships based on mutual respect, where trust is earned over time through consistent behavior.
That sounds incredibly healthy.
It is. In kindred trust, there is a fluid, safe expression of needs and the capacity to navigate conflict without fearing that the relationship will immediately end.
The ability to disagree without assuming it's a total catastrophe. But why do we get locked into the Velcro or cactus patterns in the first place? Like, why does this specific cycle repeat?
We have to look at early life attachment adversity. Attachment theory shows us that when an infant or young child experiences unmet needs, when caregivers are inconsistently responsive, emotionally absent, or actively abusive, the child develops insecure attachment styles.
They adapt to their environment.
Yes. They learn early on that the world is unsafe and that love is highly conditional on their silence or their compliance.
And those early survival blueprints endure into adulthood.
They become the operating system. They trap individuals in chronic states of hyperarousal, which is the anxious, clinging state of Velcro trust, or hypoarousal, which is the avoidant, detached state of cactus trust.
Dr. Peter Levine, one of the foremost experts on somatic trauma, he has a definition of trauma that perfectly encapsulates this entire dynamic. He says that trauma is fundamentally a loss of connection.
Yes.
It's a loss of connection to ourselves, to our bodies, to our families, to others, and to the world around us.
It is a profound isolation, and what makes it so insidious is how the trauma response distorts our perception of where the danger actually lies.
What do you mean?
Well, in Velcro and cactus patterns, we are constantly scanning for threats externally. We're looking for the betrayal in the new partner, the insult from the friend, the danger in the room.
We think the monster is outside the house. But the research points to a much more terrifying reality. What happens when the most dangerous, silencing threat is actually a voice living inside your own mind?
This is where we transition from interpersonal dynamics, how we relate to other people, to intrapsychic
On
dynamics.
how we relate to ourselves.
Exactly. When a person cannot physically escape an abusive environment, the mind will often fragment in order to survive what the body cannot.
That sounds like a really heavy concept, the mind fragmenting. How do psychologists conceptualize that happening?
One of the most effective and profound frameworks for understanding this is internal family systems, or IFS, developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz.
Okay, IFS.
IFS posits that the human mind is not one single monolithic personality. Instead, the healthy mind is naturally composed of multiple subpersonalities, which the therapy refers to as parts.
Okay, so we all have different parts. Like a part of me wants to go to the gym and a part of me wants to stay on the couch and eat a pizza. That's normal.
Exactly. That's completely normal.
Yeah.
In a healthy, non-traumatized system, these parts work together in relative harmony. They are guided by what IFS calls the core self, which is the innate center of the person that possesses qualities like compassion, calm, clarity, and curiosity.
But when trauma enters the chat, that harmony gets destroyed.
Totally destroyed. When a person experiences cumulative emotional abuse, the system is overwhelmed. To protect the core self from being completely annihilated by the psychological pain, these internal parts take on extreme, rigid roles.
So the system becomes a war zone.
Yes.
Let's break down the soldiers in this war zone, because the unconscious mechanism of how these parts operate is staggering. The first group of parts that get created are called the exiles. Who are they?
The exiles are the most vulnerable parts of the psyche. Usually they are the youngest parts.
Like the inner child.
Often, yes. They hold the raw emotion, the terror, the profound shame, the vulnerability, and the somatic memories of the abuse itself. In emotionally manipulative households, a child is often forced to suppress these feelings to maintain the peace. They are told they are too much.
So the mind takes those overwhelmed, terrified parts and just locks them away.
It exiles them. They are banished to the darkest basement of the unconscious mind because the pain they carry is deemed too dangerous for the system to feel.
But you can't just lock a terrified child in a basement and expect them to stay quiet forever. To make sure those exiles stay hidden, the mind has to hire guards. And this introduces the second group of parts, the managers.
Yes, the managers are the proactive protectors. Their entire existence is dedicated to controlling the individual's external environment and internal emotional state to ensure that the exiles are never, ever triggered. They basically run the day-to-day operations of survival.
And how do they do that? I'm trying to picture what a manager looks like in someone's daily behavior.
They manifest as our most rigid, exhausting traits. Extreme perfectionism is a manager. Hypervigilance, constantly reading the room, is a manager. And most notably, in the context of emotional abuse, the manager often manifests as a vicious, internalized critic.
The voice in your head that tells you you're worthless.
Yes. Here is the unconscious mechanism. Under chronic emotional abuse, the victim swallows the abuser's external critique whole. The manager part observes the abuser and says, okay, the abuser attacks us when we speak up or show emotion. Therefore, to survive, I must stop us from ever speaking up or showing emotion. The manager literally adopts the voice and the tactics of the abuser.
It turns into a cruel internal bodyguard.
Exactly.
It starts playing the abuser's greatest hits on an internal loop, like, you are overreacting, you are difficult, you are lucky anyone puts up with you, just shut up and be grateful.
The manager genuinely believes that if it criticizes you first, if it keeps you small, compliant, and silent, it will preemptively protect you from the external abuse. And by preventing the external abuse, it prevents the exiled parts from feeling that original, devastating pain of rejection.
That is a staggering paradox.
Yeah.
A part of your own brain decides to verbally abuse you every single day because it thinks that's the only way to save your life.
Yes.
It enforces the silence of the forest from the inside out. It's an internal hostage situation.
That's a great way to put it.
But no prison is perfect.
Right.
Right. Sometimes the pain gets triggered anyway. Someone looks at you the wrong way, or a tone of voice reminds you of the abuser, and the exile breaks out of the basement. What happens when the manager fails?
When the manager fails and the raw agony of the exile floods the conscious mind, the system is in a state of absolute emergency. That is when the third group of parts activates, the firefighters.
Firefighters sound heroic, but in this framework, they are incredibly destructive. Right?
Oh, highly destructive. They are reactive protectors. Their job is not to prevent the fire. Their job is to extinguish the emotional flames immediately by any means necessary once the fire has started.
So while the manager is proactive, trying to keep everything perfect so the fire never starts, The firefighter is reactive, the fire is raging, and they just show up with axes and hoses.
Exactly. And firefighters do not care about collateral damage. They do not care about your health, your relationships, or your future. They only care about numbing the pain of the exile right this second. Behaviorally, firefighters manifest as impulsive, extreme, and often self-destructive actions.
This is the binge drinking, the substance abuse,
Yes.
the self-harm, the severe dissociation where you just check out of reality for hours.
Binge eating, reckless sexual behavior, explosive rage. The firefighter floods the system with a stronger, different sensation to drown out the original trauma.
So to summarize this internal battlefield, your brain hires a cruel manager to beat you up before the outside world gets the chance.
Right.
If that fails and the pain surfaces, it sets off the firefighter sprinklers and completely floods the building, causing massive structural damage just to put out the fire.
That is exactly what happens.
If this is all happening underneath our conscious awareness, how do we ever stop it? How do you fire the bodyguard when the bodyguard lives in your prefrontal cortex?
Well, that is the ultimate clinical challenge. You cannot simply use logic to talk the bodyguard into quitting. In traditional talk therapy, a patient might intellectually understand that their abuser was wrong, but the manager will just argue with the therapist's logic. The trauma isn't stored in the rational part of the brain. It is locked in the primitive nervous system and the preverbal networks.
Words bounce right off the armor. The intellect is essentially guarding the door. So if talk therapy hits a wall, we have to look for a different entry point. We have to bypass the cognitive brain entirely and go straight to the hardware.
We must transition to bottom-up approaches. We move from cognitive processing to somatic release.
Somatic experiencing. This is the understanding that trauma is not just a psychological memory, like a video file stored in your head.
No, not at all.
It is physical, kinetic energy trapped in the biological tissues of your body.
It is entirely physiological. Let's return to the fight-or-flight mechanism we talked about earlier. When a predator attacks, your autonomic nervous system generates an enormous, incredible surge of survival energy. Your heart pumps massive amounts of blood to your limbs. Your muscles flood with cortisol and adrenaline. You are primed for explosive physical action.
But if you are a child or a victim of coercive control, you can't take that action. You have to freeze or fawn. You have to sit perfectly still at the dinner table while the abuse happens.
Exactly. So what happens to all that mobilized survival energy?
It has nowhere to go.
It doesn't evaporate. Because it was never discharged through fighting or fleeing, it remains bound in the nervous system. It lingers in the muscle fascia, the organs, and the neurological pathways.
And how does that trapped energy specifically affect the voice? If a survivor is struggling with silence, where is that energy physically sitting?
The body literally clamps down on the vocal mechanism to contain the energy. Survivors will chronically present with a tight, constricted throat.
I felt that, yeah.
They might suffer from shallow clavicular breathing, never taking a full breath into their diaphragm because full breaths signal relaxation, which feels dangerous. Under stress, their voice might shake uncontrollably or become unnaturally high-pitched and thin as the larynx physically rises in the throat in a defensive posture.
So the unconscious mechanism to fix this requires a complete shift in focus. Instead of analyzing our childhood memories, which, as we know, just summons the manager parts to start guarding the door, we focus purely on bodily sensations. We focus on the hardware.
Yes, we focus on interoception and proprioception.
Which are what?
Interoception is your inner felt sense, the awareness of your heartbeat, your breathing, the tension in your stomach. Proprioception is your body's awareness of its position in space. By bringing gentle, curious, non-judgmental awareness to these physical sensations, the nervous system can finally feel safe enough to begin discharging that ancient, built-up survival energy.
Our sources provide some incredibly specific, actionable somatic tools designed to facilitate this release and reclaim the physical voice. Let's walk through them. The first one is the grounding breath with gentle humming. It sounds deceptively simple.
It is simple, but its biological impact is profound. When we hum softly while extending our exhale, we directly stimulate the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve being the massive superhighway connecting the brain to the gut, passing right by the vocal cords.
Yes. The vagus nerve is the primary communication pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system. It acts as the physical brake pedal for your body's anxiety. Because the vagus nerve passes directly through the larynx, the physical vibration of humming literally massages the nerve.
So by just humming a low note, you are mechanically sending a signal up the nerve fibers to the brainstem, overriding the trauma response and telling the brain, We are safe right now. You are hacking your biology.
You are communicating safety in a language the primitive brain understands, vibration and frequency. Another vital practice is the spinal sway paired with sound.
What does that look like?
When a human being holds chronic fear, the central axis of the body, the spine, often becomes incredibly rigid. We armor our lower back, we lock our shoulders up near our ears, we protect our soft underbelly. The spinal sway invites micro movements back into the spine. You sit or stand and gently, rhythmically sway your torso side to side, or in slow circles.
Bringing fluidity back to the frozen posture.
Yes. And when you pair that gentle swaying movement with an audible sigh or a soft vocal tone, it begins to dissolve the muscular rigidity held around the heart space and the diaphragm. It reintroduces flow to areas that have been locked in a freeze response for years.
There's a third practice mentioned in the literature that I find utterly fascinating because it connects us directly to the animal kingdom, the shaken voice reset.
This observation forms the core of Dr. Pierre Levine's work in somatic experiencing. If you observe wild animals, say an antelope that has just survived a cheetah attack, the antelope runs, it might get caught, it might go into a freeze state to play dead.
Right.
Once the cheetah loses interest and leaves, the antelope doesn't just get up and casually walk away.
Right. It doesn't just dust itself off and go back to grazing.
No. The antelope will stand up and violently, uncontrollably shake its entire body for several minutes. That shaking is a deeply ingrained biological mechanism for discharging the massive autonomic energy that was mobilized for survival. Once the shaking stops, the nervous system is reset to a baseline of calm, and the animal returns to the herd without PTSD.
Human beings have that exact same biological mechanism, right?
Yeah.
We are mammals, but we don't do it. Why?
Because our complex neocortex and our social conditioning override the biological impulse. We are taught that shaking, trembling, or crying is a sign of weakness or instability. We are told to keep it together, calm down, or be brave.
Oh, wow.
So we suppress the physical shake, and in doing so, we trap the trauma energy inside the body permanently.
So the somatic practice is to intentionally recreate that biological reset. To stand with loose knees, let your arms hang, and intentionally shake your limbs, bounce your heels, let your hips sway, to let the body physically vibrate and discharge the tension for a few minutes, and then follow it with a deep, grounding vocal tone like a low ooh or
Exactly. The deeper lesson here is incredibly liberating for trauma survivors. You do not need to articulate your trauma in words to heal it.
That is so freeing.
You can move and sound your way through it, but there is a crucial clinical caveat here. You must always stay within your window of tolerance.
Meaning you don't force it. You don't try to violently shake out 20 years of abuse in one afternoon.
Never. Trauma healing is about titration. It is about taking a single drop of distress and processing it, not drinking the whole ocean. If you push the system too hard, the managers will panic, the firefighters will activate, and you will re-traumatize yourself. It requires tenderness and profound patience.
It makes me think of trying to fix a completely frozen computer. If the screen is locked up, you don't aggressively click the mouse 100 times and try to open 5 new software programs like talking, analyzing, or rationalizing. That just crashes the system harder. You have to do a hard physical reset on the hardware itself. You clear the RAM.
Yes.
Somatic work is resetting the hardware of the nervous system.
A perfect analogy. You are clearing the biological RAM so the software of the mind can run smoothly again.
But this is where the research takes a turn into something truly extraordinary. Because humming, swaying, and shaking are powerful standalone tools. But what happens when you combine this somatic, hardware-level release with the deepest psychodynamic frameworks known to science? What happens when you use music to bypass the manager parts entirely?
You enter the realm of a highly specialized, deeply transformative clinical modality. We are transitioning now into vocal psychotherapy, specifically the groundbreaking model developed by Dr. Diane Austin.
Dr. Austin's work merges depth psychology, trauma theory, psychodrama, and music therapy into this cohesive framework. And what makes it so revolutionary is that it positions the voice not just as the output of the therapy, like finally being able to speak, but as the actual surgical instrument for intrapsychic change.
The voice is the scalpel. To understand why this is so effective, we have to look at the hidden emotional need of the traumatized psyche. People who have suffered pre-verbal wounds trauma that occurred in infancy before they acquired language, or trauma that was so severe it forced the brain into a pre-verbal freeze state need pre-verbal healing.
You can't use words to heal a wound that happened before words existed.
Exactly. Using natural, spontaneous sounds, groaning, sighing, wailing, or even playful, infantile babbling, bypasses the intellectual defenses. The manager parts are highly skilled at analyzing language and arguing with words.
Right, they could debate you all day.
But they don't know how to defend against a sigh. They don't perceive a melody as a threat. The sound slips past the guards and reaches the buried exiles.
Let's break down the actual mechanics of a vocal psychotherapy session.
Yeah.
Because visualizing this process is incredible. The foundational practice Dr. Austin developed is called vocal holding. Walk us through what is physically happening in the room.
In a vocal holding session, the therapist sits at the piano. They do not play complex Mozart concertos. They play two very simple, repetitive chords or perhaps a steady, unyielding drone. And they use their own voice alongside the client's voice. They create a stable, predictable, and highly consistent acoustic environment.
Why only two chords? Why keep it so musically basic?
The simplicity is deeply intentional. If you play a complex chord progression, the client's analytical mind activates. The manager steps in and worries, am I singing the right note? Am I out of tune? Am I making a mistake? Two simple chords eliminate the possibility of a mistake. It creates an acoustic womb.
And the psychological effect of that acoustic environment evokes a very specific developmental dynamic. It mimics the regressive mother and child lullaby.
Yes. It establishes profound visceral co-regulation. For clients who experience severe attachment disruption, who never had a caregiver physically hold them and soothe their nervous system, this acoustic holding environment provides the sensory experience of a secure relational bond. The sound holds them when human arms historically have not.
Dr. Austin maps this out so clearly by aligning the musical interaction with the actual developmental stages of human independence, like how a baby learns to separate from his mother.
She categorizes it into three distinct developmental stages of sound. The first stage is unison. The therapist and the client sing the exact same pitch, the exact same note, matching breath and volume. Psychologically, this represents the infant-mother merged state, symbiosis.
Okay.
For a trauma survivor who feels fundamentally alone in the universe, singing in perfect unison provides a profound cellular sense of not being isolated.
Then once that safety is established, they move to the second stage, harmony.
In harmony, the client feels safe enough to sing a different note that harmonizes with the therapist's note. This is the psychological beginning of separation and individuation. The sound is communicating, I am different from you, I have my own voice, but we are still beautifully connected, and this difference does not destroy the relationship.
Which is the exact opposite of the abusive environment, where difference was punished. And then the third stage is grounding.
Grounding mimics the toddler stage of what psychologists call rapprochement. The therapist holds the root note, the anchor, and the client is encouraged to vocally improvise. They can explore the scale, go on a wild musical adventure, create dissonance, and then, whenever they feel untethered, they can return to the root note to touch base. They can explore the world knowing the caregiver is still there to provide safety.
That is just stunning. It's reparenting the nervous system through vibration. There's another technique in this framework called mirroring or lolling. The therapist repeats a client's sound back to them. The client sighs, the therapist sighs. The client hums a specific rhythm. The therapist echoes it exactly. This traces back to psychoanalytic theory, right? Heinz Kohut.
Yes, Heinz Kohut theorized that human beings possess a lifelong, fundamental psychological need for mirroring in order to validate our very existence. A baby coos, the mother coos back, the baby learns, I am real and I am seen. When the therapist mirrors the client's nonverbal sound, it affirms the client's emotional state without demanding explanation. It communicates, I hear your pain, you exist, your feeling is valid.
And once that profound level of trust is built, the clinical practice evolves into an advanced, intense technique called free associative singing. What does that look like?
Free associative singing incorporates elements of psychodrama. The therapist acts as a double for the client. As the client improvises words and melodies, the therapist sings alongside them in the first person.
So if the client hesitantly sings, I feel so sad, the therapist sings back, I feel so sad, validating the exact emotion.
Yes, but the crucial mechanism here is repetition. The therapist might guide the client to repeat that phrase over and over, shifting the inflection, the volume, the depth, singing, I feel sad, I feel sad, I feel sad. This repetition acts as a psychological elevator.
Going down to the basement.
Exactly. It literally drops the client from their defensive, intellectualizing mind down into the visceral reality of their physical body. The repetition fatigues the manager part, allowing the raw truth of the emotion to bypass the mind and land squarely in the heart.
The intellect is like a bouncer at an exclusive nightclub. He's standing at the velvet rope, checking IDs, looking for any painful memories trying to get in, and aggressively turning them away. But this music, the two simple chords, the lullaby rhythm, the mirroring, it sneaks in through the back door.
Yes.
The bouncer is completely distracted looking for cognitive threats, and he doesn't even know the music slipped past him. And suddenly, the suppressed emotion is inside, processing on the dance floor.
The manager is bypassed completely because it simply does not perceive a C major chord as a threat.
Okay, so we've hacked the nervous system, the somatic energy is releasing, the vocal cords are vibrating, the voice is finally unlocked inside the deep safety of the clinical environment. But that brings us to the ultimate application. How do you take this newly reclaimed voice out of the therapist's office and deploy it in the real world? How do we break the cycle of toxic relationships in our actual messy lives?
This is the phase of integration. We transition from the clinic to reality. Because finding your voice as a survivor is never a single cinematic aha moment. It is a continuous, rigorous, and active process of breaking silence, reclaiming your truth, and standing firmly in your personal power. And a key psychological framework for applying this in the real world is narrative therapy.
Narrative therapy. This is fundamentally about rewriting the story you tell yourself about who you are. The unconscious mechanism here involves two specific techniques: externalization and deconstruction. Explain how a survivor uses those tools.
Externalization is the profound psychological process of viewing the problem as existing outside of your core identity. For years, the abuser and the internal critic have told the survivor, you are broken, you are inherently flawed, you are unlovable.
Right.
Externalization shifts the language. Instead of saying, I am bad at relationships, you learn to say, I'm currently struggling with the lingering effects of systemic trauma. Instead of I am weak, it becomes, I am dealing with the biological pattern of people-pleasing that kept me safe in the past.
You draw a hard boundary between your soul and your symptoms. And deconstruction.
Deconstruction is the process of putting your core beliefs on the witness stand. It is identifying the taken-for-granted ideologies that form your worldview and cross-examining them. You look at a belief like, I have to be perfect to be worthy of love, and you ask, wait, whose voice is that? Did I inherently decide that? Or was that a rule imposed on me by a toxic parent or a narcissistic partner?
You are evicting the abuser's voice from your mind. By externalizing and deconstructing, you fundamentally change the internalized narrative. You move from the manager's terrified voice to the authentic, self-led voice. But once you build that new narrative, you have to protect it from external threats. Which brings us to the application of power, the boundary, specifically the implementation of the no-contact rule.
In the context of enduring toxic relationships, particularly with covert narcissism or emotional manipulation, boundary setting is the most crucial behavioral point of intervention. Too often, survivors remain trapped in agonizing cycles of hope and disappointment. They accept relational breadcrumbs, a momentary apology, a day of peace, rather than demanding the whole loaf of mutual respect. Implementing a no-contact boundary is an active, definitive retrieval of personal power.
And what I found so profound in the research is the reframe on the concept of silence here. Because up until this point, we've defined silence as the symptom of the trauma. But the clinical literature explains that choosing silence in a toxic relational dynamic is actually a manifestation of immense power.
It is the difference between subjugation and sovereignty. Forced silence is trauma. Chosen silence is a boundary. When a survivor initiates no contact, they are deploying silence as a shield. As long as a survivor remains constantly available, explaining their feelings, defending their reality, desperately trying to get the abuser to finally understand and validate them, they are participating in a one-sided marathon where the finish line keeps moving.
They are still playing by the abuser's rules.
Yes. Stepping into chosen silence allows the victim to step off the relational hamster wheel entirely. It forces the abuser to confront the unyielding reality of the loss, and it gives the survivor the atmospheric space to finally breathe and hear their own thoughts.
Let's look at some real-world case studies from our sources of people who executed this, who navigated the trauma, reclaimed their voices, and rewrote their narratives in extraordinary ways.
These systemic and interpersonal narratives are vital because they prove this theoretical frameworks work in practice. For instance, the case of Allison Fine. She survived a history of extreme domestic violence and the subsequent failure of systemic crisis interventions to protect her. She took that profound somatic and emotional betrayal, that suffocating silence, and she channeled it into unapologetic community activism and, incredibly, stand-up comedy.
Stand-up comedy. I cannot think of a more powerful inversion of trauma. taking the darkest, most isolating, silencing experience and forcing it into the brightest, loudest, most public spotlight possible. She took control of the microphone. And then there's the case study of Reuven, who overcame severe childhood isolation and systemic abuse in a rural environment.
Reuven's trajectory is a textbook example of externalization. He broke generational cycles of depression and silence by transitioning his pain into public advocacy. He utilized platforms like TikTok to campaign for illegal child protections, using his reclaimed voice to become the protector he never had.
And we also see this phenomenon in entirely different socioeconomic environments, which the sources refer to as the Hamptons elite context.
This is a crucial addition to the literature. Emotional abuse is not confined to any specific demographic. The Hamptons elite context describes an environment of extreme wealth, privilege, and highly polished social expectations. In these environments, severe childhood trauma, emotional neglect, and addiction are meticulously hidden behind an impenetrable image of professional success, philanthropy, and total control.
It is the ultimate, gold-plated version of The Silence of the Forest. The pressure to maintain the illusion is immense because the social stakes are so high.
Exactly. And the survivor highlighted in this case study shattered that polished silence through creative memoir writing, publishing a work titled Silent Screams. By writing the memoir, the survivor exposed the raw, unvarnished, often ugly reality beneath the facade of wealth. They chose the messy truth over the comfortable lie.
The deeper lesson woven through all of these case studies points back to a concept articulated by Mike Liu, who wrote extensively about what he capitalized as the voice. He observed that trauma survivors often speak very softly, in highly measured, careful tones, specifically to avoid making anyone else in the room uncomfortable. They are still managing everyone else's emotions with their vocal tone.
And that habit must be actively dismantled. The psychotherapist Stephen Levenkron makes a vital point regarding this. He notes that when a survivor finally begins to talk about the abuse, they often do so with clinical detachment. They report the facts without the corresponding emotion. Levenkron argues that speaking without emotion, detaching the traumatic words from the visceral feelings, actually serves to keep the core shame alive. The survivor is still hiding behind a false, intellectualized facade.
You cannot just read the transcript of your trauma. You have to hear yourself say it, and you have to feel yourself say it, with the anger, the grief, or the outrage it warrants, to truly proclaim who you are and what happened to you.
That fusion is where the transformation happens. You fuse the cognitive narrative of the mind with the somatic emotion of the body, you become whole.
But I think it is so deeply important to validate the reality of that process for anyone listening. Growth rarely feels like strength at the start. When you first start using your reclaimed voice, setting that first boundary, it does not sound like a lion's roar. It probably sounds like a shaky, terrifying whisper. Your heart is pounding out of your chest, your palms are sweating, you feel nauseous. It's exactly like learning how to walk again after a catastrophic injury. Your legs are going to tremble violently.
And we must reframe that trembling. That trembling is not a sign of weakness, and it is not a sign that you are making a mistake. That trembling is the ancient somatic survival energy finally leaving your body as you step into your authentic power.
This has been an incredibly profound journey. We've gone from the microscopic neurobiology of the vocal cords and the vagus nerve through the internal battlefields of the psyche, all the way to the sociology of boundaries and memoirs. But as we bring this deep dive to a close, there is one final, entirely unconscious frontier where your voice is actively trying to speak to you. It happens every single night.
It is one of the most fascinating phenomena in trauma recovery, the landscape of our dreams. Very often, trauma survivors report chronic, recurring dreams where they are being endlessly chased by a terrifying, abusive figure or relentlessly attacked by a disembodied, harsh voice.
The manager part, or the internalized echo of the abuser, invading the only sanctuary you have left, your sleep.
Exactly. But clinical dream analysis reveals a profound, predictive truth about the trajectory of trauma recovery. As a survivor engages in this somatic and narrative work, a shift occurs in the dreamscape. The moment the dreamer finally stops running, the moment they find their voice in the dream, turn around and speak directly to the threat, the chaser pauses.
The monster just stops.
It stops. The pursuit ends. And the psychological interpretation here is vital. The specific words you say to the monster in your dream are entirely irrelevant. The content does not matter. What matters is the psychological agency of the act of speaking. Your nervous system is practicing assertiveness on a subconscious level. Finding your voice in the dream signals to your own deepest unconscious mind that you are no longer prey.
If finding your voice can stop the relentless pursuit of the monsters in your sleep, it begs a massive question for the waking world. What is the one truth you've been avoiding, the one boundary you've been afraid to set that could fundamentally change the dynamic of your waking life?
It is a profound question,
Right.
and it is the necessary catalyst for true autonomy.
We want to leave you with that thought. And to you, the listener, whether you are dealing with a difficult boss, navigating a toxic family dynamic, or healing from decades of covert abuse, honor the silence you have carried for so long. Do not judge it. It was the armor that protected you when you were surrounded by danger. It did its job beautifully, and it kept you alive. But if you are listening to this now, in a place of safety, recognize that you no longer need to wear it. The war is over. You can take the armor off. Your voice is waiting for you. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.